For hundreds of years, vampires and werewolves, known as lycans, have been locked in a brutal shadow war. When the vampire clans finally eliminate the lycan leader, Lucien, the remaining werewolves are scattered across the globe. Their numbers dwindle, convincing vampires that victory is close and the conflict is nearly over. But time has not weakened the lycans. The older survivors adapt, developing the ability to shift forms at will and growing far more dangerous than before. In the present day, a pair of vampires stalk two suspected lycans inside a crowded subway station. Selene and Reyes are death dealers, elite vampire warriors trained specifically to hunt werewolves. The lycans, Rain and Trix, are secretly tailing a human doctor named Michael. Michael briefly notices Selene watching him before boarding a train. As Rain moves in closer, he suddenly senses something wrong. Realizing vampires are nearby, he shouts a warning. Gunfire erupts instantly. Reyes dives for cover behind a pillar, but when he tries to return fire, he's struck in the shoulder. Selene watches helplessly as the glowing round burns into his flesh, scorching him from the inside. Passengers flee in panic while Selene joins the firefight. Bullets fly recklessly, tearing through walls and platforms. During the chaos, Trix accidentally wounds a bystander. Another vampire, Nathaniel, arrives to support Selene. Michael, seeing the injured woman, rushes to help her, giving Trix the opening he needs to seize him. Selene reacts fast and shoots Trix, forcing him to release Michael. Trix bolts into the tunnel, and Selene dives through a train window to pursue. A silver round hits her shoulder, but she tears it out and keeps moving. Elsewhere, Rain runs out of ammunition and attempts to escape, only to be tackled by Nathaniel. Rain shoves him away and morphs into his wolf form, slaughtering Nathaniel in seconds. Selene follows a trail of blood deep underground. Trix attempts to ambush her from behind, but she spins and fires. After unloading several rounds, she finally drops him. Examining his weapon, Selene realizes every bullet emits a strange glow. Suddenly, Rain appears. Selene hurls razor-edged discs at him and flees into another tunnel. Strange noises echo through the darkness, growls mixed with cheering. She briefly glimpses a hidden lycan stronghold where two werewolves are battling in full beast form. Before she can investigate further, Rain closes in, forcing her to retreat. Inside the den, the crowd celebrates until Lucien storms in and fires a shot into the air. The combatants revert to human form as Lucien berates them for losing discipline. Back at the vampire estate, Selene presents the glowing ammunition to weapons expert Khan. His analysis reveals the bullets contain ultraviolet radiation, essentially bottled sunlight. This means the lycans have discovered a way to turn sunlight into a weapon. Selene informs vampire leader Craven that she found a lycan nest, but he dismisses her claim, insisting too few lycans remain to organize anything that large. Determined, Selene visits the crypt of Victor, an elder vampire locked in centuries-long sleep. Erica interrupts, telling Selene to prepare for an upcoming gathering, but Selene instead reviews surveillance footage from the subway. She realizes the lycans weren't randomly attacking, they were targeting Michael. When she reports this to Craven, he again brushes off her concerns. Meanwhile, at the lycan hideout, the scientist Singed extracts blood from a captive human and combines it with lycan blood. The experiment fails. Rain returns carrying Trix's body. Singed explains that the silver rounds destroyed vital organs, preventing regeneration. Furious, Lucien declares that retrieving Michael now falls to him personally. At the hospital, police question Michael about the subway massacre, suspecting his involvement. Later, Selene breaks into Michael's apartment searching for answers. When Michael suddenly walks in, Selene pins him against the wall, demanding to know why lycans are hunting him. Before he can respond, lycans crash through the ceiling. Selene opens fire. Amid the chaos, Michael slips away and sprints toward the elevator. Selene tries to follow, but the doors slam shut, leaving her behind. As more lycans close in, Selene opens fire, cutting several of them down, but their numbers keep coming. Realizing she's about to be overwhelmed, she fires a circular pattern at the floor beneath her feet. The tiles shatter and she crashes through to the level below. In the lobby, the elevator doors slide open to reveal Michael face-to-face with Lucien. Before Michael can react, Selene bursts in, unloading round after round. Lucien absorbs the hits, then lunges forward, slamming Michael to the ground and biting deep into his neck, drawing as much blood as possible. Selene drags Michael away, but Lucien already has what he came for. He transfers Michael's blood into a small vial and focuses, forcing the embedded bullets out of his flesh. Selene loads Michael into her car and speeds off. Without warning, Lucien drops from above, landing on the roof. He plunges a massive blade through the metal, stabbing downward and slices Selene across the shoulder. She slams the brakes, throwing Lucien off, then floors the accelerator in an attempt to run him down. Lucien narrowly leaps aside, allowing them to escape. Inside the car, Michael notices Selene is bleeding badly and urges her to pull over. She ignores him and instead raises her gun, keeping him at bay. Seconds later, she loses consciousness. The car veers off the road, flips violently, and plunges into the river. Trapped underwater, Michael grabs Selene's fallen gun and smashes the window. He drags her to the surface, performs CPR, and manages to revive her. Tearing off his jacket, he wraps it tightly around her wounded shoulder. Back at the Lycan hideout, Lucien hands Singed the blood sample. After running tests, Singed confirms their suspicion. Michael is the key they've been searching for. Exhausted, Michael eventually drifts into sleep and experiences disturbing visions of a long-forgotten massacre inside the vampire manor. When he awakens, he finds himself inside that very manor with Selene. Moments later, she's summoned to Craven's office. Enraged, Craven accuses her of disobeying orders and smuggling a human into their sanctuary. As they argue, Erica checks on Michael and notices the bite mark on his neck. Instantly, she hisses and springs onto the ceiling. Terrified, Michael dives through a window and escapes. The brutal landing triggers another wave of haunting visions. Hearing guard dogs approaching, he scrambles over the front gate and disappears into the night. When Craven learns Michael has fled, he lashes out and slaps Selene. Later, Selene vents her anger at the firing range. Khan arrives with a prototype weapon. She tests it and watches in awe as the target holes ooze liquid silver nitrate. These new rounds inject molten silver directly into a Lycan's bloodstream, preventing them from forcing the metal back out. Selene can't stop thinking about the powerful Lycan she encountered earlier and begins doubting Craven's long-standing claim that Lucien was truly killed. Meanwhile, Craven secretly meets with Lucien. He reminds Lucien that their arrangement required staying hidden, not provoking open war. Lucien grabs Craven by the throat, reminding him that he once nearly killed him and that Craven's authority exists only because Lucien allows it. Back at the manor, Selene sneaks into the library and studies ancient records of the war. She discovers Craven was the sole survivor of a vampire assault on Lucien's stronghold. As proof of victory, Craven brought back a strip of skin believed to belong to Lucien. The scar pattern on that preserved skin matches the necklace worn by the dominant Lycan Selene saw earlier. On her way out, Erica intercepts Selene and reveals that Michael was bitten by a werewolf. At the hospital, Michael confides in a coworker about the wound and the terrifying visions. The coworker claims he'll help, but instead returns with police. Spotting them, Michael smashes a window and escapes. Desperate for answers, Selene returns to Victor's crypt. She sends the guard away with a flimsy excuse, opens the sarcophagus, and pours her blood inside, attempting to awaken Victor early. She explains everything: Michael, Lucien, Craven, the weapons, begging for guidance. Before Victor can respond, the guard approaches. Selene seals the coffin and hides. Outside the manor gates, Michael appears, calling for Selene. Ignoring Craven's furious warnings, she runs to him and they drive off together. Back inside, Erica informs Craven that Michael is a Lycan. At that same moment, Victor awakens. Furious at the state of the coven, he scolds Craven for failing as leader. Victor demands another elder be revived as well, but Craven explains that Victor's awakening happened prematurely. They must wait until the council arrives the next day to complete the ritual. During the drive, Selene explains the ancient war to Michael. Normally, humans bitten by vampires or Lycans die within an hour, overwhelmed by the deadly viral strains carried in their blood. The visions haunting Michael aren't hallucinations at all, they're memories, transferred to him through the bite. Selene and Michael reach an abandoned structure once used by vampires for interrogations. There, Selene gives Michael a vial of synthetic blood. She explains that vampires secretly control the corporation that manufactures it. As they rest, Selene opens up about her past. When she was a child, she was forced to listen as her entire family was slaughtered by werewolves. Victor found her afterward and turned her into a vampire, saving her life. Since then, she's hunted Lycans for revenge. She believes the wolves began the war, though she admits she doesn't know the full truth. Michael shares his own loss. His fiancée died in a car accident, leaving him completely alone. When Selene prepares to leave, Michael insists on coming with her. Emotion takes over and they kiss. Using the moment as a distraction, Selene snaps handcuffs onto him, securing him to a chair. She reminds him that the next night will bring a full moon, and if he changes, he could become a mindless killing machine. She leaves him a handgun with a single silver round. It won't kill him, but it may slow the transformation long enough for him to survive. Back at the manor, Selene confronts Craven and punches him before demanding to speak with Victor. Victor is furious that he was awakened prematurely. Selene warns him that the coven is under threat, but Victor dismisses her claims, suggesting Lycan influence has corrupted her thinking. Selene is sentenced to stand trial once the council arrives. Until then, she's confined to the manor. Soon after, Craven announces that his personal guards, not Victor's trusted forces, will retrieve the council, a decision that raises eyebrows. At the train station, the council arrives alongside Elder Amelia. Craven's men quietly exchange signals with the guards. Suddenly, Lycans drop onto the moving train. They slaughter the vampires inside while Craven's men stand by and do nothing. Back at the manor, Erica cuts the power, triggering alarms. She frees Selene from confinement and secretly hands her a weapon. Once Selene escapes, Erica immediately informs Craven, pretending outrage to shift blame. Concerned by the council's delay, Khan dispatches scouts to investigate. At the station, Rain collects Amelia's blood. Elsewhere, Michael fires the silver bullet at his handcuffs, but the chain holds. The wasted shot leaves him defenseless as the visions intensify and his mental state deteriorates. Selene returns to the interrogation building and realizes Lycans have tracked her. She unlocks Michael, and as footsteps approach, she fires through the door, dropping several attackers. She then shoots out a window and orders Michael to jump. Selene stays behind, covering his escape. Michael lands on the pavement with unnatural balance, moving more like an animal than a man. Before he can process what happened, police surround him and place him under arrest. Selene watches the squad car drive away, then searches the dead Lycans for any survivors. Inside the police vehicle, Michael sees the full moon rising. His body begins to twist and contort as bones shift and muscles swell. The terrified officers inject him with a suppressant, halting the transformation mid-process. At the manor, Victor has fully regained his strength. He listens as Craven mocks Selene's fantasy about hidden conspiracies. Their conversation is interrupted when Selene storms in with Singed. She wounds him to force cooperation. Singed reveals the ancient truth. In the 5th century, a warlord named Alexander Corvinus survived a plague that wiped out his village. Instead of dying, the disease mutated inside his body, making him the first immortal. Alexander later had 3 sons. One was bitten by a wolf and became the first Lycan. Another was bitten by a bat and became the first vampire. The third remained human. Michael descends from that third bloodline. His blood can bond with both vampire and Lycan strains, making him the perfect catalyst for creating a hybrid, stronger than either species. Lucian's plan is to combine his own blood with Michael's and Amelia's to become that ultimate hybrid. When Victor insists Lucian has been dead for centuries, Singed admits the truth. Craven lied. Realizing his exposure, Craven flees the manor in his car. At the train station, investigators uncover the massacre and notify the manor. Khan reports that Amelia has been completely drained of blood. Enraged, Victor executes Singed on the spot. He turns to Selene, apologizes for doubting her, then gives her a devastating command: find Michael, kill him. At the Lycan stronghold, Lucian draws blood from Michael. As Lucian leans close, Michael notices the Lycan's necklace, the same marking Selene once saw on the powerful werewolf in the tunnels. Michael's visions sharpen, transforming into fully formed memories. He sees Lucian in the distant past, chained inside a chamber, forced to watch as his vampire lover is dragged into sunlight and burned alive. When Victor enters the room to reclaim her necklace, the full moon rises. Lucian suddenly shifts into his wolf form, snaps his chains, seizes the necklace, and escapes into the night. Michael snaps back to the present and tells Lucian everything he witnessed. Lucian explains the truth. Long ago, Lycans were enslaved by vampires and forced to guard their tombs during daylight hours. He secretly fell in love with Victor's daughter. When Victor discovered their relationship, he intended to execute them both. Lucian managed to flee, but Victor, enraged and humiliated, launched a genocidal war against the Lycans. Before Lucian can say more, Craven arrives with his guards, furious that Lucian has violated their arrangement. Lucian calmly claims everything is proceeding according to plan, that a new world order is coming. Suddenly, explosions rock the den. Selene storms in with a strike team, hurling a grenade that wipes out several Lycan guards. Panic floods Craven's face. Seizing the moment, he fires a silver nitrate round into Lucian's chest and abandons him. As Selene's team pushes deeper into the tunnels, slaughtering Lycans, Rain returns and finds Lucian bleeding out. He also spots Craven's men attempting to escape and immediately gives chase. Rain hurls the squad leader into a pool. The vampire retaliates with metal whips. Rain shifts into wolf form, enduring the blows long enough to close the distance and rip the vampire apart. Elsewhere, Lucian struggles to force the nitrate from his bloodstream, but it won't come out. Selene hears movement and leads her squad toward the sound. 2 Lycans ambush her at once. She sprints down another tunnel, vaults over one wolf, and shoots it midair. She reloads just in time to gun down the second attacker. Nearby, Khan and his men kill a lichen lying in wait, only for another beast to emerge from behind and slaughter them all. Trying to flee, Craven climbs a ladder toward an exit. He freezes when Victor steps into his path. Victor soon encounters Rain and impales him with a sword, executing him for his betrayal. Elsewhere, a lichen lunges at Michael, but Selene kills it instantly. She frees Michael, and they share a brief, desperate kiss, watched silently by Lucien. The pair attempt to sneak away but find Craven blocking their escape. Craven shoots Michael with nitrate rounds and drops a devastating truth. It wasn't the lichens who murdered Selene's family. It was Victor. Victor despised feeding on animals like other vampires. Secretly, he hunted humans for sport. He spared Selene only because she reminded him of his daughter. Craven raises his gun to kill Selene, but Lucien stabs him through the leg. Lucien tells Selene the only way to save Michael is to bite him, merging their bloodlines and creating the hybrid. Selene sinks her fangs into Michael's neck. Craven, screaming in rage, unloads multiple shots into Lucien, killing him, then escapes. Victor enters the chamber, rips Selene away, and hurls Michael through a stone wall. Selene confronts Victor with Craven's confession. Victor admits it. He retrieves the necklace from Lucien's corpse and explains that although he loved his daughter, he executed her because she was pregnant with Lucien's child. Meanwhile, Michael's body begins to change. The fusion of vampire, lichen, and corvinous blood creates something entirely new. Michael rises no longer human. He attacks Victor. The two titans clash violently. Though Michael's strength is overwhelming, Victor's centuries of experience allow him to gain the upper hand and slam Michael to the ground. 3 vampires rush in and open fire on Michael. Selene guns them down one by one. Victor strikes Selene aside and locks Michael in a crushing chokehold. Selene spots Victor's fallen sword. She grabs it and slices Victor's head clean off. Silence falls. Terrified by the power they've witnessed, the remaining lichens vanish into the darkness. Michael slowly reverts to human form. Selene picks up the necklace. Hand in hand, they leave together. Deep within the manor, singed, spilled blood drips into another ancient coffin, and the second sleeping elder begins to awaken. Analysis: what if I told you the greatest war in human history isn't fought by humans at all? It isn't written in our textbooks, it isn't shown on the news, and it isn't happening in distant galaxies. It's happening right now beneath our streets, inside abandoned subway tunnels, behind locked mansion doors, a war between creatures that were never supposed to exist. Vampires, werewolves. 2 ancient species locked in a blood feud that has lasted for centuries, not for territory, not for resources, but for pride, revenge, and buried lies. In 2003, a film emerged that didn't treat these monsters like fairy tale creatures. It treated them like organized factions, armed, tactical, ruthless. Underworld didn't ask, do vampires exist? It asked something far more dangerous. What if monsters run societies, with rules, politics, and propaganda? This is a world where loyalty is demanded, history is manipulated, and obedience is enforced with bullets. At the center of it all stands Selene, a death dealer, a soldier trained to kill without question, until one mission forces her to doubt everything she believes. Today, we're diving deep into the shadows of Underworld. We'll explore its hidden themes, its tragic mythology, its symbolism, its secrets, and why this dark, stylish action film became a cult classic despite divided critics. This isn't just a vampire movie. This is a story about control, about inherited hatred, and about what happens when someone dares to break a cycle that has existed for hundreds of years. Welcome to the war beneath the world. Let me tell you its story. Released in 2003, Underworld isn't just another supernatural action film. It's a descent into a hidden society that exists alongside our own, unseen, unheard, and at war. Set in a modern city drenched in darkness and rain, the movie reveals a secret reality where vampires and werewolves, known as lichens, have been battling each other for centuries. Not in open fields, not in ancient castles, but in alleyways, subway tunnels, abandoned factories, corporate boardrooms disguised as aristocratic mansions. This isn't medieval fantasy. This is urban mythology. At the center of the story is Selene, an elite vampire enforcer known as a death dealer. Her job is simple: track the lichens, hunt them, eliminate them. No questions, no mercy. But during what should be a routine mission, Selene notices something strange. The lichens are no longer acting like hunted animals. They're organized, focused, strategic, and most disturbing of all, they're targeting a single human man, a nobody, a normal person, or so it seems. As Selene begins pulling at this loose thread, she unknowingly starts unraveling a conspiracy that stretches back centuries, a truth so dangerous it threatens to collapse the entire foundation of vampire society. Without revealing spoilers, Underworld is essentially the story of what happens when a loyal soldier starts to suspect that the war she's been fighting may have been built on lies. It's a tale of awakening, of forbidden connections, and of a hidden bloodline capable of changing the balance of power forever. Think of Underworld as a fusion of gothic horror, sci-fi action, and tragic romance, wrapped in leather coats, automatic weapons, and moonlit skylines. It's stylish, it's violent, it's brooding, but beneath all the gunfire and supernatural spectacle is a story about identity, about questioning authority, and about what it truly means to choose your own destiny. Now that you understand the world we're stepping into, let's break down the genres and themes that shape Underworld's dark soul. On the surface, Underworld looks like a stylish vampire action movie. Guns, leather, slow-motion fights. Monsters tearing each other apart in the darkness. But that's only the outer skin. Beneath the spectacle lies a carefully layered genre hybrid, and that blend is the key to why the film feels different from most supernatural stories. First, this is dark fantasy. Not magical castles and glowing spells, but decaying mansions, cracked stone hallways, ancient beings trapped in modern cities, a fantasy world that feels rotten with age. Second, this is a science-driven supernatural thriller. The monsters aren't powered by vague magic. Their abilities are tied to bloodlines, genetics, and biological evolution. It treats vampirism and lycanthropy almost like diseases or engineered conditions, which gives the story a grounded, almost sci-fi edge. Third, this is a tragic romance hidden inside an action film. Because at its heart, Underworld isn't about which species wins. It's about two individuals who were never supposed to meet, never supposed to trust each other, never supposed to care. And yet, they do. Now let's talk about the core themes driving everything. The biggest theme, inherited hatred. No one in this war remembers how it truly began. They simply inherit the anger. They inherit the stories. They inherit the enemies. Children grow up hating creatures they've never spoken to. Soldiers kill for reasons they've never questioned. Another major theme, corruption of power. The ones who claim to protect their people are often the ones manipulating them. History isn't written by the victors here. It's rewritten by the liars. Then there's identity. Who are you when everything you were taught is wrong? Are you still a soldier? Are you still loyal, or are you finally free? Emotionally, the film carries a cold, mournful tone. There's very little joy in this world. Even victories feel hollow. Even survival feels exhausting, and that's intentional, because Underworld isn't a power fantasy. It's a melancholic nightmare about being trapped inside a war you never chose. As for the audience, this movie isn't designed for viewers seeking light entertainment. It's for people who enjoy dark mythology, morally gray characters, stylized violence, and slow-burn world building. If you like stories where monsters aren't purely evil, where heroes are deeply flawed, and where truth is more dangerous than any weapon, then Underworld speaks your language. Now that we understand the genres and themes shaping this universe, it's time to step into the story itself. Let's walk through what actually happens, step by step. Our story begins in darkness. Not just visual darkness, but moral darkness. A world where killing is routine, where questioning orders is forbidden, where war has become tradition. Meet Selene, an elite vampire warrior known as a death dealer. Her purpose is simple. Hunt lycans, track them, execute them. No hesitation, no mercy. For centuries, Selene has believed one truth: the lycans slaughtered her family. That belief fuels her rage. It defines her identity. It gives her existence meaning. But everything begins to fracture during what should be a routine mission. While observing a lycan operation, Selene notices something strange. They aren't hunting vampires. They're hunting a human, a single man, Michael Corvin. At first, this makes no sense. Humans are irrelevant in the war. They're weak, disposable. So why would lycans risk exposure for one ordinary person? Selene secretly follows Michael. And in doing so, she breaks the first rule of her world: never question the mission. Before Selene can uncover the truth, the lycans attack. Michael is bitten, not killed, infected. And instead of executing him, Selene makes a choice that changes everything. She saves him. This single act places Selene on a collision course with both species. As Michael's body begins to change, Selene starts digging into ancient records, forbidden histories, and sealed memories. What she discovers is devastating. The vampire elders, the very figures she worships, have been lying. Not bending the truth, not exaggerating. Lying. The origins of the war are not what Selene was taught. The vampires were not innocent victims. The lycans were not mindless beasts. The entire conflict began with betrayal from the vampire side. Selene also uncovers the real reason Michael matters. He isn't random. he carries a rare genetic lineage. His blood can merge vampire and lichen DNA, creating something that has never existed before, a hybrid, a being stronger than both species. The lichens want to use Michael as a weapon, the vampires want to control him. Neither side cares if he survives. To them, Michael is not a person, he's a resource. Meanwhile, Seleni's loyalty begins collapsing. Every revelation pushes her further away from the vampire hierarchy. Every secret confirms her worst fear. She has been a weapon in someone else's lie. Michael's transformation accelerates. His humanity starts slipping. But unlike most monsters in this world, Michael still feels, still questions, still fears what he's becoming. And that makes Selene see herself in him, two beings shaped by forces they never chose. As tensions rise, ancient vampire elders awaken, power shifts, old alliances crumble. And Selene finally confronts the vampire who orchestrated her family's murder centuries ago, the man she once called a savior, the man who built her entire identity on false vengeance. When the truth is fully exposed, there is no going back. Selene kills her former master, not in rage, not in triumph, but in liberation. At the same time, Michael completes his transformation, not into a vampire, not into a lichen, but into something new, something impossible, something that should not exist, a true hybrid, the living proof that both species are based on flawed bloodlines and broken history. The film ends not with victory, but with abandonment. Selene walks away from vampire society, from their laws, from their war. She chooses Michael. She chooses truth. She chooses uncertainty over comfortable lies. And for the first time in centuries, the war beneath the world no longer has a clear shape, because when lies collapse, everything becomes possible. Now that we've walked through the story, let's talk about what that ending actually means and why it changes the entire message of Underworld. The final moments of Underworld are quiet, not triumphant, not celebratory, no cheering crowds, no victory speeches, just silence and the weight of truth. After centuries of slaughter, Selene finally learns the full story. The war did not begin with lichen savagery. It did not begin with monstrous betrayal. It began with vampire arrogance, with a ruling class desperate to maintain control. Selene discovers that the vampire elder who rescued her after her family's massacre was the very man who ordered their execution. He needed a loyal soldier. He needed a weapon shaped by grief, so he manufactured a tragedy. Then pointed Selene at an enemy. For hundreds of years, she didn't fight for justice. She fought for a lie. This revelation is the emotional climax of the film, not the gunfights, not the explosions, the truth. And when Selene confronts her former master, she doesn't deliver a heroic speech. She doesn't beg for explanations. She executes him, clean, final, because forgiveness isn't what this moment is about. Freedom is. By killing him, Selene isn't seeking revenge. She's erasing the chain that bound her entire existence. At the same time, Michael completes his transformation. He does not become a vampire. He does not become a lichen. He becomes something unprecedented, a hybrid, a living contradiction, proof that the biological wall separating both species was never absolute, which carries enormous symbolic weight. Michael's existence alone exposes the war as meaningless. Because if the two bloodlines can merge, then the idea of pure species is a lie. And if purity is a lie, then the entire justification for genocide collapses. Now comes Selene's final choice. She does not return to the vampire coven. She does not claim leadership. She does not attempt to reform the system. She walks away. This matters, because revolutions don't always start with overthrowing kings. Sometimes they start with refusing to participate. Selene choosing Michael is not just a romantic decision. It's a philosophical one. She chooses a future that has no script, no hierarchy, no ancient rulebook. Only uncertainty, and that's terrifying, but it's honest. So what does the ending mean? It means the real enemy was never vampires or lichens. The real enemy was manufactured history. It means hatred survives because it is taught. It means systems endure because people obey them. And it means breaking a cycle doesn't require conquering an army. It requires rejecting a lie. The film closes without resolving the war. And that's intentional. Because Underworld isn't about who wins the conflict. It's about who stops believing in it. Now that we understand the ending, let's dig into the hidden details, visual clues, and symbolic elements the movie quietly plants throughout its runtime. Underworld doesn't explain everything out loud. It whispers, through visuals, through environments, through small choices that most viewers barely notice. And once you start paying attention, you realize the film has been telling its deeper story long before any character speaks the truth. Let's start with color. The entire movie is soaked in cold blues and steel grays. This isn't just a stylistic choice. Blue represents emotional numbness, a world frozen in unresolved grief. Vampires don't live in warm candlelight, they live in sterile, icy spaces. because they aren't alive, not truly. Their society is stagnant, frozen in tradition. Meanwhile, the lichens are often shown in brown, rust, and dirty earth tones. Colors associated with soil, decay, and physical labor. They live underground. They hide in industrial ruins, visually reinforcing that they exist at the bottom of this social hierarchy. Now look at architecture. Vampire headquarters resemble ancient European mansions. High ceilings, stone pillars, stained glass, symbols of aristocracy. These aren't monsters living in caves, they're an elite ruling class. Lichens, on the other hand, operate in abandoned tunnels, subway systems, and factories, former places of human industry, suggesting they were once used, then discarded, just like tools. Another subtle detail mirrors. Classic vampire lore says vampires don't reflect, but Underworld rarely shows mirrors at all. Why? Because reflection isn't about appearance, it's about self-awareness, and almost no one in this world is truly self-aware. Everyone is following inherited scripts. Another major symbol is chains and cages. Michael is physically chained, but Selene is psychologically chained. Both are prisoners. Just in different ways. Watch Selene closely throughout the film. Early on, she kills without hesitation. Later, she pauses. She hesitates. She watches. Her body language changes long before her loyalty does. The movie foreshadows her rebellion through silence, not dialogue. Even Michael's name carries symbolism. Michael is traditionally associated with archangels, warriors, messengers. In this story, Michael becomes a living message. That the divide between species is artificial. There's also subtle foreshadowing in the opening narration. Selene describes the war as endless, not righteous, not justified, endless. That single word hints that the conflict has lost all meaning. Another hidden detail: the vampire elders sleep in coffins surrounded by machinery. They require entire systems to keep themselves alive, symbolizing how dependent their power is on maintaining control. They don't survive naturally. They survive artificially, through exploitation. One final detail: notice how often Selene is framed alone in wide shots. Even among vampires, even inside her own headquarters, visually showing that she never truly belonged. She was always separate, always destined to walk away. Underworld may look like a gun-heavy action film, but underneath, it's a visual essay about class systems, propaganda, and inherited hatred. The movie doesn't shout its message, it embeds it. Now that we've uncovered the hidden language of the film, let's move behind the camera and explore the real-world facts, trivia, and fascinating production choices that shaped Underworld. The world of Underworld feels massive, ancient, layered, but what makes it even more impressive is how much of that world was created with practical craftsmanship rather than pure digital spectacle. Let's start with something surprising. When Underworld was developed, it did not originate as a vampire movie. It began as an original concept focused on a secret war between two underground factions. The supernatural angle was added later, which explains why the creatures behave more like organized crime families than traditional movie monsters. Now let's talk about Selene's iconic look. That leather suit, it wasn't just costume design, it was world building. The filmmakers wanted vampires to look tactical, functional, like special forces operatives, not aristocrats in flowing capes. The sleek black outfits were inspired by cyberpunk fashion and late 90s industrial aesthetics, creating a bridge between gothic horror and modern action cinema. Kate Beckinsale underwent extensive weapons training before filming, not just basic handling, but tactical movement, reloading drills, close quarters combat. The goal was to make Selene's action feel disciplined, efficient, professional, not flashy. Michael Sheen, who played Lucien, studied both human behavior and animal movement to shape his performance. He wanted Lucien to feel intelligent but physically predatory, a leader who had learned to survive in cages, not palaces. Another fascinating detail: much of the action was filmed using practical effects, wire work. Real explosions, physical stunts. CGI was used mainly for transformations and enhancement, not as the backbone of the action, which is one reason the film still holds up visually. Here's a piece of hidden franchise trivia. The filmmakers developed an extensive backstory timeline that stretches thousands of years. Most of it never appears on screen, but it guided character motivations, power structures, and political dynamics. So when characters speak vaguely about ancient events, there is a deeper history behind those lines. It's just implied, not explained. Budget-wise, Underworld was made for relatively modest cost compared to other action blockbusters of its time. Yet its visual style rivaled much bigger productions, a strong example of aesthetic focus outperforming raw spending. One more fun detail: many of Selene's weapons were custom designed specifically for the film. They don't exist as real-world models. They were built to visually reflect vampire elegance mixed with modern lethality. Finally, no one involved expected Underworld to become a franchise. It was designed as a standalone story. Its success surprised the studio, and that unexpected popularity is what eventually turned this single dark experiment into an entire cinematic universe. Now that we've explored how Underworld was crafted, let's compare it to similar films and see where it truly stands among its genre rivals. When Underworld arrived in theaters, it didn't appear in a vacuum. It stepped into a cinematic landscape already filled with vampires, werewolves, and supernatural hunters. But instead of copying what worked, it chose a different path. Let's start with the most obvious comparison, Blade. Both films feature leather-clad vampire hunters. Both mix gunplay with supernatural combat. Both present vampires as organized factions. But Blade treats its world like a comic book. Bright highlights, stylized violence, clear hero versus villain dynamics. Underworld, on the other hand, feels colder, heavier, more tragic. There is no clear good side. Only broken systems and manipulated soldiers. Where Blade celebrates power, Underworld mourns it. Now look at The Matrix. The influence is undeniable. Black coats, slow-motion action, bullet time-inspired choreography. But while The Matrix is about escaping an artificial reality, Underworld is about discovering that your history itself is artificial. One questions reality, the other questions memory. Then there's Van Helsing. A monster-hunting adventure packed with gothic imagery, but Van Helsing leans into spectacle and pulp fantasy. Underworld leans into political allegory. It isn't interested in monster of the week storytelling. It's interested in long-term oppression. Now let's talk about traditional vampire cinema. Most vampire movies focus on seduction, immortality as temptation, romantic tragedy. Underworld barely cares about seduction. Its vampires aren't glamorous immortals. They're corporate soldiers. They clock in, they receive orders, they execute targets. That alone separates it from most genre peers. Another major difference, female leadership. Before Underworld, most supernatural action franchises were male-driven. Selene isn't a sidekick. She isn't a love interest first. She is the narrative engine. The story moves because she questions authority, not because a male hero saves her. So where does Underworld fall short compared to rivals? It's heavier, more exposition-driven, less accessible to casual viewers. Some films make their worlds easy to digest. Underworld makes you work, but where it excels is atmosphere. Few supernatural action films sustain a single tone as consistently. From opening frame to final shot, the movie never abandons its bleak identity. It never tries to become funny, never tries to become bright, never tries to soften itself. That commitment gives it a distinct personality. So in the grand hierarchy of monster cinema, Underworld isn't the most beloved. It isn't the most critically praised, but it may be one of the most stylistically unified. It doesn't chase trends, it builds a lane and stays in it. Now that we've positioned Underworld among its genre neighbors, let's talk about how the world reacted to it. Critics, audiences, and the long road to cult status. When Underworld was first released, the reaction was anything but unified. Critics and audiences did not see the same movie, and that divide has followed the film ever since. Many critics focused on what Underworld wasn't. They criticized its heavy exposition, its serious tone, its lack of humor. Some dismissed it as style over substance. Others labeled it derivative because of surface similarities to films like The Matrix and Blade. But here's the interesting part. Audiences didn't seem to care. Viewers connected with the atmosphere, the world building, the gothic mood, the idea of a hidden civilization beneath everyday life. Fans weren't looking for a comedy. They weren't looking for bright heroics. They wanted immersion. They wanted darkness. They wanted a mythology that felt larger than a single film, and Underworld delivered that. Word of mouth slowly transformed the movie. It didn't explode as an instant classic. Instead, it grew through DVD sales, late-night TV airings, online forums, fan discussions. People kept returning to it, rewatching it, noticing new details. That's a classic sign of cult status. Another factor in its longevity, timing. The early 2000s were filled with flashy action movies, explosions, one-liners, fast pacing. Underworld felt slower, colder, more deliberate, which made it stand out. For some viewers, that made it boring. For others, that made it fascinating. Today, Underworld is often described as underrated, not because everyone suddenly agrees it's a masterpiece, but because its ambition is more appreciated in hindsight. Viewers now recognize that it attempted something risky, building an original supernatural mythology in a genre dominated by adaptations. It didn't lean on famous novels. It didn't rely on existing comic book IP. It built its own world from scratch. That alone earns it respect. So is Underworld divisive? Absolutely. Is it universally loved? No, but has it endured? Without question. The strongest evidence, franchise longevity, sequels. Expanded lore, a fanbase that still debates its mythology decades later. In the end, the Underworld may never top critics' best of lists, but it occupies something arguably more valuable, a permanent place in genre culture. Now that we've explored how the world received the film, let's bring everything together: strengths, flaws, and the final verdict. So after the gunfire fades, after the blood settles, after the secrets are exposed to what is Underworld really. It's not a perfect film, it never was, but it was never trying to be safe either. Underworld's greatest strength is commitment, commitment to tone, commitment to atmosphere, commitment to its bleak identity. From the first frame to the last, it knows exactly what kind of world it wants to be: cold, gothic, unforgiving. Its world building is ambitious. It introduces an entire hidden civilization, complete with history, class systems, politics, and internal corruption. Few action films attempt that level of structural depth. Kate Beckinsale's Selene remains one of the most recognizable female action leads of her era, not because she's flashy, not because she's quippy, but because she feels disciplined, haunted, controlled, a soldier slowly awakening. The visual design still stands out: the blue-tinted cinematography, the leather and steel aesthetic, the blend of ancient architecture and modern industry. It all creates a distinctive identity that hasn't faded with time. But let's be honest about the weaknesses. The film relies heavily on exposition. Characters often explain history instead of letting it unfold organically. Some emotional beats could have been deeper. Certain side characters exist more as lore pieces than fully realized people, and the pacing occasionally slows under the weight of its mythology. So who is Underworld for? It's for viewers who enjoy dark fantasy over bright spectacle, mood over humor, world building over simplicity, morally gray characters, slow burn mythologies. If you're looking for fast, colorful fun, this probably isn't your movie. But if you're drawn to shadowy worlds, hidden societies, and stories about breaking inherited lies, then Underworld is absolutely worth your time. Final verdict: Underworld is a flawed but fascinating gothic action film that dared to build its own mythology and succeeded enough to carve out a permanent place in genre history. Not a masterpiece, not a disaster, but a bold, atmospheric cult classic that still whispers to the right audience. And sometimes that's more powerful than mass appeal. Reviewers. At its core, Underworld is far from an original creation, and that's easily its biggest drawback. The central idea of vampires battling werewolves might feel somewhat novel today, but the execution constantly reminds you of better, earlier movies. The rigid vampire hierarchy echoes Blade. The leather-heavy fashion and acrobatic gunplay resemble The Matrix, and even certain action beats, like a creature attacking from outside a moving vehicle, feel lifted from classic sci-fi action films. Yet despite these familiar elements and its heavy borrowing, the movie still manages to be reasonably entertaining. The plot introduces a few intriguing concepts, and director Len Wiseman keeps the pacing steady while bathing the film in slick, shadowy style. The result is a production that, while lacking originality, never fully collapses under the weight of its influences. The movie leans heavily into gunfights, chases, and large-scale monster clashes. Although Cellini's dual pistol posing can come across as forced and overly performative, the savage werewolf assaults deliver real impact. The use of silver ammunition and UV-based weaponry adds a playful twist to the combat, giving the action scenes some extra flavor. The screenplay may not break new ground, but it moves smoothly from one set piece to the next. Aside from issues with the lead character's personality, there's surprisingly little that feels outright terrible. It's best described as efficient rather than inspired. The cast is another mixed bag. Scott Speedman does a solid job portraying an ordinary man dragged into a supernatural war. Michael Sheen stands out as Lucian, injecting emotional weight into a role that could have easily been one note. Kate Beckinsale occasionally shows flashes of effectiveness, but her attempt at projecting icy coolness often feels strained, making Selene resemble a pale imitation of other famous action heroines rather than a fully realized character. Elsewhere, Bill Nighy embraces theatrical excess as an ancient vampire leader, while Kevin Grevu provides one of the film's most memorable presences as a massive, intimidating Lycan enforcer. Sophia Myles also leaves a strong impression, to the point where one might wish her character had been given more prominence. From a technical standpoint, the visual effects are impressive. The creature transformations are especially striking, even if the werewolf designs themselves appear somewhat fuzzy and indistinct at times. The climactic decapitation sequence, though reminiscent of similar moments in other films, lands as a satisfying finale. Another pleasant surprise is the amount of gore, which pushes the film closer toward adult-oriented horror than a sanitized action fantasy. Ultimately, Underworld is not a landmark entry in the genre, but it is a serviceable and sometimes fun watch. It plays like a gothic, comic book-style adventure featuring a leather-clad monster hunter in a dark urban underworld. The story is thin, but the atmosphere, action, and creature mythology provide enough substance to keep things moving. The long-standing war between vampires and lycans serves as the backdrop. Selene, a specialized vampire assassin, becomes entangled with a human named Michael, who is secretly tied to the werewolf bloodline. The lycans believe he holds the key to creating a powerful hybrid, while Selene grows increasingly conflicted about her mission. The film never pretends to be deep. It's glossy, shallow, and style-driven, but it does offer a basic mythology that gives the chaos some structure. Unfortunately, many of the vampire performances feel exaggerated, partly because the dialogue rarely gives the actors much to work with. Looking back, it's difficult to justify how this first installment sparked such a lengthy franchise. The director's cut, in particular, runs far longer than the story truly warrants. There's enough solid material here for a tight 90-minute feature, but the extra runtime is padded with forgettable filler. In my view, the series would need to significantly improve its focus, character depth, and narrative discipline to truly earn its longevity. Too often, the films rely on makeup, costumes, and visual flair to distract from underdeveloped personalities and thin storytelling. Still, audiences keep showing up, and as long as that remains true, new entries will continue to appear. Underworld may not be great cinema, but it occupies a comfortable space as stylish genre entertainment, flawed, derivative, but occasionally enjoyable. Modern cinema is flooded with long-running franchises, some stretching across countless sequels, spin-offs, and reboots. Looking back to where this particular saga began, with its 2003 debut, I have mixed feelings. While I don't personally consider it essential viewing today, I still remember how striking it felt when it first arrived. When the film originally hit theaters, it felt bold and stylish, offering a slick collision between two legendary monsters, vampires and werewolves, referred to here as lycans. The concept alone was enough to grab attention, and the creative team behind the script crafted a story that quickly pulls viewers into a shadowy world of ancient rivalries, secret societies, and endless bloodshed. From the opening moments, the movie establishes a dark, moody atmosphere where both factions battle for dominance, each driven by their own motives and hidden agendas. One of the film's strengths lies in its range of characters. Both sides of the conflict are populated with figures that feel distinct, giving audiences options when it comes to choosing allegiances. Whether you lean toward the sleek, disciplined vampires or the feral, rage-fueled lycans, there's enough personality on display to keep things interesting. The cast does solid work across the board. The performers bring a sense of physical commitment to their roles, and the lead actress, in particular, fully embraces the image of a cold, lethal warrior wrapped in gothic elegance. While some characters could have benefited from deeper development, the performances are serviceable enough to carry the film through its heavy reliance on action. Speaking of action, this is where the movie truly places its focus. Gunfights, martial arts, and explosive confrontations arrive frequently and at a fast pace. The choreography is clean, the editing is energetic, and the visual presentation adds polish to each encounter. Stylish cinematography enhances the experience, making many sequences visually appealing even when the narrative depth is thin. The action is clearly designed as spectacle first and storytelling second. For anyone who somehow missed this film over the years, it may still be worth a watch out of sheer curiosity. It's the kind of movie that aims to entertain rather than challenge, and in that sense, it succeeds. There's enough momentum, atmosphere, and gun-blazing chaos to make repeat viewings possible, especially for fans of dark fantasy action. Within the story, the supposed death of the feared Lycan leader causes his clan to splinter. The vampires declare victory and begin systematically hunting the remaining werewolves, pushing them toward extinction. A vampire warrior named Selene is part of this cleanup operation. During what should be a routine mission in a subway station, events spiral into a violent firefight, revealing that the Lycans are hiding underground, and more importantly, that they are targeting a specific human named Michael. At the same time, rumors of the Lycan leader's demise prove exaggerated, as he secretly prepares his next move in the war. Selene becomes increasingly determined to uncover why this ordinary human has become so important. Behind-the-scenes trivia surrounding the movie only adds to its reputation. Stories of legal disputes and rapid approval of additional installments reflect how commercially viable the concept was from the start. The film undeniably borrows from many familiar influences, but criticizing a blockbuster for lacking originality almost feels pointless. It's part of the genre's DNA. While some marketing comparisons to classic tragic romances don't hold much weight, the core narrative is competent enough to link the action scenes together. The director does a respectable job balancing gothic aesthetics with flashy, crowd-pleasing visuals. The tone blends grim darkness with stylized coolness, clearly aimed at appealing to a younger audience. Leather outfits, slow-motion shots, and elaborate shootouts dominate the screen. Certain moments strongly echo other iconic sci-fi action films, especially during the subway battle, but imitation doesn't necessarily ruin the fun. Performance-wise, the lead actress nails the physicality and presence required for her role, even if her character isn't given much emotional complexity. The male lead lacks strong charisma, making him more of a functional plot device than a compelling hero. The actor portraying the Lycan leader delivers a capable performance, though personal associations with his other well-known roles may be distracting for some viewers. Another veteran actor stands out mainly because his appearance perfectly suits the ancient vampire aesthetic. Not every supporting actor shines, but a few memorable faces help round out the ensemble. In the end, this is very much a product aimed at teenage and young adult audiences. Monsters, gunfire, dark romance, and stylish violence packaged together for maximum mass appeal. It delivers exactly what that audience expects, but little more. Don't go in hoping for rich storytelling, deep character arcs, or originality. Instead, approach it as a glossy, loud, and visually driven action fantasy, where vampires and werewolves clash under the rule of opposing leaders. Vampires fronted by a deadly female warrior, and Lycans commanded by a relentless alpha. If that sounds appealing, the film will probably satisfy. Just keep expectations in check. At the center of the story is a third major presence, Michael, a human whose blood carries an astonishing secret. His biology holds the potential to bridge two ancient enemies, and both vampires and Lycans are willing to slaughter one another to gain control of him. From this premise alone, the film establishes itself as a blend of horror, suspense, brutal combat, explosive action, and occasional splashes of gore. Visually, the movie leans hard into atmosphere. The production design is striking, filled with towering Gothic architecture, rain-soaked alleyways, shadowy underground chambers, and grim urban decay. Every location feels deliberately stylized to enhance the eerie tone. Special effects are handled through a mixture of CGI and practical makeup, and while some moments look more convincing than others, the overall presentation is ambitious and often impressive. The cinematography complements the dark aesthetic with glossy visuals and cool-toned lighting, giving the film a sleek, comic book sheen. The soundtrack leans heavily into rock and industrial sounds, which heightens the energy but occasionally overshadows opportunities for more haunting orchestral scoring. Kate Beckinsale commands attention as Selene, a lethal vampire warrior who moves through gunfights and swordplay with confidence and style. She embodies the role of an action heroine convincingly, carrying much of the film's momentum. Scott Speedman as Michael delivers a serviceable performance, though his presence is frequently eclipsed by Beckinsale's dominant screen energy. One of the more interesting narrative choices is how the film attempts to rationalize supernatural mythology with pseudoscientific explanations. Michael's blood becomes the key to explaining the origins of the vampire-Lycan war, as well as the possibility of creating a hybrid species. It's an unexpected approach that adds a layer of lore, even if it sometimes feels more intriguing in concept than in execution. The movie also offers its own spins on classic monster tropes. Werewolves aren't limited by the full moon, silver is weaponized in new ways, and vampires rely heavily on firearms rather than fangs. While this modernization gives the film a distinctive flavor, it also raises questions, particularly about why biting and clawing take a backseat to endless gunfire. One standout moment arrives during the confrontation between Selene and Victor, where a brutal diagonal decapitation provides a memorably gruesome visual that surpasses the impact of a standard beheading. Narratively, the film reveals that the ancient war began as a personal tragedy, sparked by forbidden love and betrayal between the two species. Selene gradually uncovers uncomfortable truths about her own leaders and realizes that the conflict may be built on lies passed down through generations. The supporting cast adds texture to the world, with Bill Nighy bringing gravitas to Victor and Michael Sheen injecting intensity into Lucien. Several secondary characters populate the vampire hierarchy and Lycan resistance, though most are lightly sketched rather than deeply explored. While the special effects and action sequences are plentiful, they don't always elevate the story. At times, the film feels more interested in imitating the visual language of slick sci-fi action cinema than in developing a compelling emotional core. The result is competent spectacle rather than genuinely gripping drama. Ultimately, the film plays like a dark, glossy monster comic brought to life, clearly aimed at fans of gothic aesthetics, stylish violence, and supernatural mythology. It prioritizes look and mood over narrative depth, but it remains entertaining enough for viewers who enjoy moody action horror hybrids. Though it may not reinvent the genre, it lays enough groundwork and introduces enough intriguing ideas to spark curiosity about what future installments might explore. For fans of vampires, werewolves, and stylish supernatural battles, it delivers a decent dose of midnight movie fun. Movies like Underworld were never meant to redefine horror cinema, but they do aim to provide stylish, fast-paced entertainment, and in that sense, they mostly succeed. The premise isn't groundbreaking. Ancient feuds between supernatural species have been explored countless times before, yet the execution here remains engaging thanks to a striking visual style and a cast that largely commits to the material. Kate Beckinsale's sleek and lethal Selene stands at the center of the story, portraying a vampire warrior caught in a centuries-old war with werewolves, or lycans. Opposite her, Michael Sheen delivers a commanding performance as Lucian, the imposing lycan leader, adding depth and menace to the conflict. Scott Speedman appears as Michael Corvin, a seemingly ordinary human who becomes entangled in the chaos. While he offers plenty of screen presence, his character functions more as a narrative device than a fully realized personality. Meanwhile, Bill Nighy steals scenes as Victor, an ancient vampire elder awakened earlier than intended, chewing through the scenery with delicious theatrical flair. The film's world is drenched in shadows, leather coats, and industrial architecture. Characters race through dim cityscapes, dodging ambushes and uncovering conspiracies, all while trying to prevent the fragile balance between vampires and lycans from collapsing into total war. The action sequences are heavily stylized and tightly choreographed, though they begin to feel repetitive over time. Some supporting performances, particularly Shane Brawley's Craven, fail to leave much of an impression. Still, there's undeniable entertainment value here. The pounding, aggressive soundtrack complements the film's relentless energy, and beneath all the gunfire and acrobatics, there is an actual storyline involving lineage, betrayal, and forbidden connections. Selene's decision to protect Michael stems from both personal attraction and the fear that his bloodline holds a dangerous secret. The lycans hunt for him, and the vampire's internal divisions add layers of intrigue. In this universe, vampires view themselves as the guardians of order, determined to wipe out the lycans for what they consider the greater good. Lycans, vulnerable to silver, develop extraordinary ways to weaponize it, forcing vampires to counter with silver nitrate ammunition. These tactical details help flesh out the mythology and give the battles a sense of internal logic. Beckinsale, previously known for softer or more conventional roles, embraces a colder, more aggressive persona here. For many genre fans, this performance became her defining image, similar to how Milla Jovovich is forever linked to Resident Evil. Whether this qualifies as a true breakout role is debatable, but it certainly cemented her place in action fantasy cinema. That said, not everyone will connect with the characters. Selene's perpetual scowl and emotionally distant demeanor may make her difficult to root for, and most of the cast operates on a similar wavelength of grim seriousness. The film also leans heavily into violence and bloodshed, making for a bleak, exhausting experience rather than a fun monster romp. Visually, however, Underworld delivers. The special effects are solid, and the blue-gray color palette gives the film a distinctive identity. There are also some late story twists that complicate who is truly good or evil, which adds a welcome touch of ambiguity. For some viewers, this is a stylish, guilty pleasure. For others, it's an overlong, excessively loud mashup that feels like Blade colliding with the Matrix, with a hint of comic book monster spectacle thrown in. If you're a devoted werewolf fan hoping for a groundbreaking cinematic comeback, you may walk away disappointed. But if you're in the mood for dark visuals, gun-heavy action, and gothic atmosphere, Underworld offers exactly that, no more, no less. I'll admit right away that I'm probably a bit old school when it comes to monsters like vampires and werewolves. To me, these creatures belong to ancient folklore, dripping with dusty legends, gothic atmosphere, and old-world mystique. So when they're reimagined as slick, gun-toting, techno-warriors wrapped in leather and surrounded by glowing blue machinery, something inside me winces. It feels less like mythology and more like mythology run through a music video filter. Much of this approach can be laid at the feet of director Len Wiseman. At no point does he truly convince me that he's operating beyond the mindset of a stylish commercial filmmaker. The entire production often feels like a prolonged fashion shoot mixed with a high-budget promotional reel for late-night television. Even worse, it seems intentional, as if the glossy surface is meant to distract from the thin storytelling underneath. And yes, there's the unavoidable elephant in the room, Kate Beckinsale. Before this film, she barely registered on my radar, and after seeing this, I can't honestly say I was converted into a fan. She looks fantastic, no doubt about it, but physical presence alone doesn't make a compelling character. Most of the remaining cast leaves little impression, with the partial exception of Lucien, the Lycan leader, who at least carries some emotional weight. My biggest frustration, however, lies with the film's core idea. We're told that vampires and werewolves have been locked in an endless war for centuries. Sounds promising, right? Yet once the layers are peeled back, the supposed original concept boils down to one of the oldest tropes in fiction: forbidden love sparking an eternal conflict. The movie presents this revelation as groundbreaking, but it's really just an ancient tale wearing modern clothes. There's nothing wrong with classic storytelling, but don't pretend it's revolutionary. Another odd choice is how the film frames its factions. The vampires come across as smug, lethargic, and frequently irritating, while the Lycans feel driven, organized, and oddly more sympathetic. If anything, the movie accidentally makes the so-called monsters feel more human than the elegant immortals. Taken as a whole, the movie might seem edgy and thrilling to younger viewers who thrive on fast cuts, leather coats, and wall-to-wall action. But for fans who grew up on traditional horror, it's likely to leave a hollow aftertaste. The plot centers on Michael, a perfectly ordinary hospital worker who suddenly becomes the target of Lycan forces for reasons unknown to him. His life collides with Selene, a hardened vampire warrior who decides to protect him, drawing him deeper into the ancient war. Standing in their way are the scheming vampire Craven and the ferocious Lycan leader Lucien. To be fair, the film does have its share of entertaining elements. The weaponry is imaginative, and the idea of custom ammunition designed for specific supernatural enemies is fun. The action scenes are plentiful, fast, and aggressively edited. Beckinsale certainly looks convincing as an action heroine, and Speedman has enough charm to sell the reluctant hero angle. The problem is that it's difficult to care. The characters feel distant for much of the runtime, and even when emotional beats are attempted, they're smothered beneath layers of stylization. The movie's heavy dependence on digital effects doesn't help. Many sequences resemble animated cutscenes rather than tangible physical events. The werewolves, in particular, often look awkward and artificial. Atmosphere is one area where the film partially succeeds. The rain-soaked cityscapes and shadowy interiors create a moody backdrop, and there's a constant sense of gloom hanging over everything. Still, style overwhelms substance, leaving the experience visually slick but emotionally thin. One of the film's more intriguing components is a late-game revelation, suggesting that history may not be as straightforward as everyone believes. Unfortunately, many viewers will see this twist coming from miles away. Supporting performances offer mixed results. Michael Sheen brings charisma to Lucien, Bill Nighy projects authority as the vampire elder Victor, and Sophia Myles adds some spark as Erica. Shane Brawley, however, struggles to give Craven any real depth, and some of his reactions drift unintentionally into comedy. The script comes from a small creative team that also appears on-screen, which perhaps explains why the film feels more like a passion project than a polished narrative. Watching the film again after many years, I was surprised by how much I'd forgotten. It's clearly the foundation of a long-running franchise, and as such, it deserves a certain level of respect for laying the groundwork. But while I can appreciate its role as the starting point, that doesn't mean I find it especially satisfying as a standalone story. In the end, this is a movie that values aesthetics over mythology, attitude over atmosphere, and surface cool over genuine horror. For some, that's enough. For me, it isn't. It's rare to say this about a long-running franchise, but in many ways the later installments surpass the original. Still, this first film is where everything begins. Selene, portrayed by Kate Beckinsale, is driven by a single purpose: to serve as a ruthless death dealer in her people's war against the Lycans. That devotion pulls her into a much deeper mystery than she ever expected. The movie moves at a rapid pace and embraces a relentlessly dark atmosphere. Vampires may be vulnerable to sunlight, but here you'd barely know the sun exists at all. Nearly every scene unfolds under the cover of night, giving the impression that the story takes place during one endless stretch of darkness. Fortunately, the visuals remain clear enough to follow the action without becoming exhausting to watch. Released before the wave of modern vampire versus werewolf blockbusters, this film promised a hidden war raging beneath the human world. It feels very much like a product of the early 2000s, borrowing heavily from the stylistic trends of that era. The ambition is clear. The filmmakers aim for a grand, mythic conflict and a fresh mythology. Unfortunately, those aspirations are only partially realized. the influence of The Matrix is impossible to miss. With that franchise reaching its climax the same year, the similarities in leather-heavy fashion, slow-motion gunplay, and blue-tinted visuals stand out. While the movie does manage to establish a look of its own, it never fully escapes the shadow of its inspirations. Technical flaws, uneven direction, and a shaky script repeatedly hold it back. The mythology draws obvious parallels to tabletop role-playing games centered on vampire and werewolf clans, which themselves were inspired by Gothic literature and modern vampire fiction. Instead of lone monsters lurking in the shadows, the story presents organized underground societies operating beneath major cities. It's an intriguing concept that gives the world some scale and structure. Tonally, the film feels like a strange blend of science fiction action, gothic horror, and tragic romance. Elements resemble parts of Terminator, Blade II, and even Romeo and Juliet. However, it never quite captures the relentless tension of the first, the kinetic energy of the second, or the emotional weight of the third. As a result, the movie often feels familiar rather than distinctive. In this universe, vampires and lycans exist as rival populations rather than isolated creatures. The two sides have been locked in a violent feud for centuries, though the lycans are steadily losing ground. Selene is among the elite vampire hunters, motivated by revenge for what she believes the lycans did to her family. When Selene discovers that the lycans are hunting a human doctor named Michael Corvin, she suspects a larger plot is unfolding. Her investigation leads her to believe that Craven, the acting leader of the vampire coven, may be secretly working with Lucien, the lycan leader, while Victor, the true coven master, lies dormant. On paper, this setup has plenty of potential. In execution, however, the writing struggles to develop these ideas with much depth. The depiction of vampires blends old and new traditions. There are traces of classic Gothic elegance mixed with a modern, technological edge. Ancient stone halls sit alongside firearms and laboratory equipment, visually representing creatures who are both ancient and evolving. This combination is one of the film's stronger world-building choices. At the same time, the story disregards several long-established vampire conventions in ways that feel arbitrary. Werewolves gaining the ability to transform at will can be justified for narrative convenience, but other changes are harder to excuse. Vampires can see their reflections, religious symbols hold no power, and blood consumption is strangely downplayed. Even when Selene nearly dies from blood loss, she later recovers without needing to feed, an odd omission for a genre built around blood as a central motif. All of this leaves the film in an awkward position. It introduces a compelling premise and a visually stylish universe, but it never fully commits to exploring its ideas or respecting its own mythology. The end result is a movie that's watchable and occasionally striking, yet ultimately unable to rise above its influences or truly stand apart from other genre entries. Although the film continues to push the idea that cloned blood places limitations on vampire survival, this concept ultimately functions less as a meaningful plot device and more as a convenient break on their brutality. Instead of deepening the mythology, it feels like a narrative shortcut designed to restrain the creatures rather than explore them. On the creature design front, the lycans initially impress thanks to the heavy reliance on practical effects, which sets the film apart from many CGI-heavy productions of its era. However, the illusion quickly breaks once these creatures begin moving. Their motion feels stiff and outdated, aging the film far more than necessary. A more restrained visual approach, using shadow, darkness, and strategic editing, could have masked many of these shortcomings. The director's choice to openly showcase these effects ends up working against the film. The werewolf effects were developed under the supervision of veteran creature designer Patrick Tatopoulos, a respected name in the genre with a long history in monster-driven cinema and television. While his experience is undeniable, the final results here are uneven, fluctuating between moments of competence and sequences that fall noticeably flat. Interestingly, Tatopoulos would later step into the director's chair for the third installment of the franchise, which makes these early experiments feel like a testing ground rather than a fully realized vision. One of the film's biggest conceptual missteps lies in its depiction of an ancient supernatural war. For a story built around vampires and werewolves, the heavy dependence on modern firearms feels oddly unimaginative. Yes, the ammunition is modified with silver and infrared properties, but watching mythical beings wage war primarily through gunfights strips the conflict of its primal potential. The central romance between Selene and Michael also struggles to convince. Their connection feels more like a plot requirement than an organic emotional bond, giving their relationship a hollow, perfunctory quality. Narratively, the film leans heavily on the well-worn, chosen one formula, echoing the same structural beats popularized by early 2000s sci-fi blockbusters. A regular man stumbles into a hidden reality, becomes hunted, is rescued by a mysterious woman, and eventually discovers he possesses unique qualities that could reshape an ongoing war. The parallels are hard to ignore, and while surface details differ, the underlying framework feels overly familiar. Where the movie finds new life is in its world building and atmosphere. Despite being set in the modern era, the director infuses the visuals with a Victorian sensibility. Thick fog, aged architecture, and perpetual darkness establish a distinctive Gothic identity. Nearly the entire story unfolds at night, a choice that reinforces the film's thematic identity and suits its supernatural subject matter. The filmmaker's background in art direction is evident. Style consistently takes precedence over narrative depth. Budapest's historic locations provide an excellent foundation, offering old-world structures and naturally somber surroundings that enhance the film's gloomy aesthetic. Production design is easily one of the movie's strongest assets. Unfortunately, this visual ambition is not matched across all technical departments. The visual effects fluctuate wildly in quality, and the cinematography's relentless monochrome palette becomes exhausting over time. In striving for a Gothic tone, the imagery often sacrifices clarity and visual variety. Storytelling remains another weak point. The plot lacks strong development, and action scenes rely heavily on genre cliches, slow-motion shots, wire-assisted acrobatics, and exaggerated finishing blows that feel borrowed rather than inspired. The film wears its influences on its sleeve, sometimes to a distracting degree. Still, the stylized aesthetic holds undeniable appeal. The leather-clad Gothic action hero look, especially embodied by Kate Beckinsale, became instantly iconic, while Scott Speedman offers a more conventional counterpart for audiences less drawn to the femme fatale archetype. Perhaps the most puzzling flaw is the film's length. Given its thin narrative and repetitive action beats, the extended runtime only amplifies its weaknesses rather than enhancing its strengths. In the end, Underworld succeeds more as a visual mood piece than as a compelling piece of storytelling. An atmospheric spectacle with flashes of creativity, but one that struggles to rise above its derivative foundations. Although Underworld delivers a constant stream of action and stylized spectacle, its overextended runtime ultimately works against it. Several sequences linger far longer than necessary, and with tighter editing, the film easily could have shed 20 minutes. Instead, repetition sets in, causing moments that should feel impactful to lose their punch. By the time a narrative twist arrives late in the second act, it feels more like a last-minute attempt to energize a fatigued story than a genuine turning point. With only a short stretch remaining, that surprise simply isn't enough to rescue the overall experience. Directed by first-timer Len Wiseman, the film clearly targets a specific audience, and for that crowd, it mostly succeeds. However, viewers hoping for richer storytelling or deeper character work may walk away unsatisfied. Underworld is best suited for those who don't demand complexity from a vampire versus werewolf tale. Visually, the movie shines with moody environments and slick design, but its script remains fairly routine, while the direction and editing tend to overindulge, making the experience feel exhausting rather than exhilarating. The story presents a forbidden romance between Selene, a hardened vampire warrior, and Michael, a human entangled in the werewolf conflict, echoing a familiar star-crossed lovers dynamic. Yet emotional depth is largely overshadowed by gunfire and choreography. As someone who enjoys action-heavy films, the standout moment for me was an intense elevator sequence in which Selene fires relentlessly at a plummeting lift before blasting through the floor to escape. That scene sticks in memory more than anything else the movie offers. Despite its flaws, Underworld stands among the stronger dark action films that followed the influence of The Matrix. The concept of modern vampires locked in a centuries-long war with evolved werewolves is compelling, especially within a bleak, urban setting reminiscent of a Gothic metropolis. The aesthetic alone gives the film a distinct personality. Kate Beckinsale commands the screen with physical confidence, leaping, fighting, and posing with effortless cool in her sleek leather armor. She spends much of the movie in action mode, dual pistols blazing, and fans will appreciate her constant presence. Supporting performances are solid as well. Shane Brawley brings sleazy menace to Craven, Bill Nighy delivers aristocratic authority as Victor, and Michael Sheen adds unsettling energy as the Lycan leader, Lucien. One of the film's more entertaining aspects is its imaginative weaponry. Specialized ammunition and unique anti-creature tools give the battles a sense of novelty, even when the story beats feel familiar. Beneath the action and mythology, the film's driving force is clearly sensuality. Style, atmosphere, and costuming play a major role in shaping its identity. The movie places its female lead at the center, wraps her in a dark, fetish-inspired visual world, and builds everything else around that image. Narrative depth, character growth, and world building often take a backseat to aesthetics. The problem is that for such an approach to truly succeed, it requires either a magnetic lead performance or bold, visionary direction. While Beckinsale looks the part, the film itself lacks the creative spark needed to elevate its borrowed ideas. Much of its DNA feels stitched together from earlier genre hits, and while that formula can be entertaining, it rarely feels fresh. In the end, Underworld is a stylish, violent, and visually striking genre piece that delivers surface-level thrills but little substance. It satisfies as dark fantasy eye candy, yet falls short of becoming a memorable classic. Fans of gothic action may find plenty to enjoy, but those seeking originality or emotional depth are likely to come away underwhelmed. From its opening moments, this rain-soaked, shadowy action thriller plunges viewers into a bleak modern world fueled by tragedy, vengeance, and ancient hatred. While its foundation follows a familiar supernatural rivalry, the film introduces enough clever twists and striking ideas to rise above standard genre formulas. One standout concept is how both factions weaponize each other's greatest weaknesses, vampires firing silver-based rounds, while werewolves counter with ammunition infused with ultraviolet energy, mimicking the lethal power of sunlight. The transformation effects are particularly impressive, capturing the violent shift from human to beast in ways that feel both brutal and fluid. Even more memorable are the sequences of werewolves sprinting across walls and ceilings in relentless pursuit, creating visuals that linger long after the scene ends. One inventive moment even shows a wounded creature forcing bullets out of its own flesh using sheer physical control, emphasizing just how fearsome these monsters truly are. Though the runtime stretches past 2 hours, the story rarely loses momentum. The narrative's steady stream of betrayals, secrets, and revelations keeps the pacing lively, while the antagonists are menacing enough to hold your attention without pushing the film into pure horror territory. Interestingly, despite its comic book aesthetic, the story originates from an original screenplay rather than an adaptation, which lends it a distinct identity. The audio design also plays a major role in establishing atmosphere. Heavy industrial tones blend with sweeping orchestral elements, creating a thunderous soundscape that complements the relentless gunfire and chaotic combat. Between the pounding score and occasional rock-infused tracks, the film maintains a dark, aggressive pulse throughout. At the center of the story is Selene, a sleek, leather-clad vampire warrior driven by an insatiable desire for revenge. She believes werewolves slaughtered her family and would have killed her as well, had she not been rescued and transformed by an ancient vampire elder. For centuries, vampires and werewolves have been locked in brutal conflict, and it appears the vampires are finally gaining the upper hand. However, as Selene soon discovers, things are far more complicated. While the elder sleeps in his crypt, his trusted protege quietly undermines vampire authority, secretly negotiating with the enemy. His hidden agenda involves a dangerous experiment, one that could allow vampires and werewolves to breed and create a powerful hybrid race. When Selene uncovers this treachery and awakens the elder, the fragile balance between the factions shatters. The film also introduces a human wildcard, Michael, an ordinary man with extraordinary genetic potential. He possesses the rare ability to absorb both vampire and werewolf traits, making him a key figure in the supernatural arms race. When Michael saves Selene's life, an unexpected emotional bond forms between them, complicating her single-minded pursuit of vengeance. Director Len Wiseman makes impressive use of a relatively modest budget, crafting a visually rich world filled with gothic castles, underground lairs, and shadow-drenched cityscapes. The emphasis remains firmly on kinetic action, but the film wisely pauses for brief exposition to clarify shifting alliances and hidden motives. Character development may not be especially deep, yet several figures evolve as the truth about the past comes to light. Selene, in particular, transforms from a ruthless executioner into a conflicted warrior, forced to question everything she believed about her origins and her supposed savior. Flashbacks further reveal darker layers to the Elder's history, shedding light on his obsessive hatred toward werewolves. One surprising aspect is how little attention the film gives to romance or sexuality. Instead, it focuses almost exclusively on bloodshed, power struggles, and moral corruption. While it may not reach the iconic status of genre-defining titles like The Crow, The Matrix, or Blade, the movie succeeds in carving out its own identity through atmosphere, world building, and relentless momentum. Ultimately, this film stands as a stylish, action-heavy supernatural saga that delivers exactly what it promises: gunfights, monsters, betrayals, and a brooding heroine caught between duty and truth. It may not reinvent the genre, but it offers a distinctive, darkly polished entry that earns its place among modern vampire werewolf tales. Many critics seemed oddly hostile toward this film, dismissing it as derivative and claiming it adds nothing new to the genre. A large portion of reviewers brushed it aside for lacking the glossy finish of bigger franchises. But honestly, the mere fact that a dark, effects-heavy action horror movie of this scale was produced in England by a largely British team already feels like a small miracle. On the surface, the premise sounds familiar: vampires locked in an endless war with werewolves. A striking female vampire warrior rescues a strong, attractive human who is being hunted by lycans. Why she saves him is the real question, and while I won't spoil it, there's far more beneath this setup than it first appears. This movie is unapologetically intense. It's loud, aggressive, soaked in atmosphere, and packed with relentless gunfire. Yes, watching supernatural creatures unload automatic weapons at each other makes very little logical sense, but somehow it works, especially when the lead vampire is dual-wielding pistols and looking effortlessly cool doing it. Visually, the film leans hard into a gloomy aesthetic: desaturated colors, shadowy architecture, thick fog, constant rain, industrial locations, and a pounding soundtrack. Blood flows freely, the pace rarely slows, and the story barrels forward with only brief pauses for exposition before plunging back into chaos. It's exhausting in a good way. Performances aren't really the point here. This is a style-first experience driven by mood, violence, and imagery. That said, the vampires look fantastic in their leather battle gear, particularly those long trench coats, which feel iconic. The human lead isn't very convincing, but to be fair, the character is thinly written, leaving the actor little to work with. One supporting villain stands out by chewing the scenery with a constant sneer, and strangely enough, it suits the role. Among horror releases of its year, this ranks near the top for me. Compared to certain other genre films that were getting attention at the time, this one feels far more polished and confident. I also appreciate that the movie avoids jokey humor or self-aware camp. It treats its ridiculousness with total seriousness, and that commitment makes all the difference. I'll admit that when I first saw the trailers, I expected a cheap imitation of other popular action films, borrowing visual cues from cyberpunk gunfists and gothic superhero movies. And while those influences are definitely present, the final product isn't quite as hollow as I feared. The action itself is solid, though occasionally confusing. Some sequences are edited in a way that makes it hard to tell where characters are positioned during firefights. Most of the combat relies heavily on gunplay, which becomes repetitive. Ironically, the film is at its best during the moments when lycans fully transform and engage in close-quarters combat with vampires. Those scenes feel raw, dangerous, and exciting. The climactic showdown near the end is especially strong, tense, fast, and unpredictable. The creature effects deserve real praise. Whether practical or digital, the werewolves look excellent, and the transformations are convincing. Discovering that very little CGI was used makes the achievement even more impressive. Where the film stumbles is its heavy reliance on story. It spends a surprising amount of time on lore and mythology, yet the narrative itself isn't particularly groundbreaking. The film seems convinced its plot is deeper than it actually is, and it introduces new vampire and lycan concepts without always explaining them clearly. The result is a story that's interesting in theory but messy in execution. Another small frustration is visual similarity. In human form, vampires and lycans often look nearly identical, which makes it hard at times to tell who's on which side. The acting across the board is serviceable. Nobody delivers a standout performance, but nothing is outright disastrous either. Character development is thin, and most supporting players are either unpleasant from the start or revealed to be untrustworthy later, which limits emotional investment. Cinematography is inconsistent, occasionally stylish, occasionally sloppy, but the strong production design and creature work compensate for these flaws. In the end, the movie may resemble a mashup of other franchises at first glance, but it does contain a handful of original ideas beneath the surface. I'd recommend it to fans of dark, gothic action horror who enjoy atmosphere, monsters, and stylized violence. Just don't go in expecting revolutionary storytelling or non-stop jaw-dropping action. One final note. If you've already watched the trailer, you've probably seen a large portion of the film's best action moments. Keep your expectations in check, and you'll likely have a good time. This is the kind of movie you'll probably enjoy most if you already have a strong appreciation for dark, gothic action horror films. From a technical standpoint, It's well-crafted, featuring a thick, shadowy atmosphere and a consistently moody visual tone. The special effects hold up reasonably well, and several of the action scenes are staged and shot with real flair. That said, the film never quite reaches the level of greatness its premise promises. Its biggest weakness is that it isn't especially fun. The story treats itself with relentless seriousness, and a touch of humor or lightness could have helped balance the heavy tone. Because of this, the experience can feel dense and exhausting at times, which lowers the overall entertainment value. The narrative also becomes harder to track than necessary, largely due to its overly solemn presentation. The idea of vampires locked in an eternal war with werewolves is inherently exciting, but the execution leans more toward stylized gloom than accessible thrills. While undeniably slick in appearance, the movie often feels emotionally hollow. It looks impressive, but rarely feels alive. Another drawback is the lack of truly engaging characters. Selene is undeniably cool and visually striking, yet we never fully connect with her on a deeper emotional level. On top of that, the romantic dynamic between the two leads never quite clicks, which weakens important story beats. Performances across the board are serviceable. The actors suit their roles, and that goes a long way. One standout is Bill Nighy, who brings gravitas and personality to his imposing vampire elder character, easily becoming the most memorable presence in the film. Despite its flaws, the movie remains watchable, especially for fans of stylish action horror and those who enjoyed the early Blade films. I'd be open to checking out the sequel, though probably not in a rush. Personally, this film holds a special place for me. It was one of my earliest exposures to horror at a time when I didn't even like the genre, and it ended up sparking a long-lasting fascination. Revisiting it today, it still carries much of the same appeal it had back then. One of the film's greatest strengths is its core concept and creative foundation. Credit is due to the original creator and the director for transforming a simple idea into a fully realized cinematic world. The movie blends supernatural mythology with influences from stylish sci-fi action and superhero cinema, creating a hybrid that appeals to fans of multiple genres. The cast is another major plus, featuring a strong lineup that helps elevate the material. Everyone looks perfectly suited to the aesthetic, especially with the iconic leather-heavy wardrobe that has since become synonymous with the franchise. The action is plentiful, fast-paced, and frequently enhanced by slow-motion effects that emphasize the film's kinetic energy. The central storyline involving the attempt to create a hybrid being adds intrigue, and the revelation about hidden betrayals from the past provides a satisfying narrative jolt. The ending wisely leaves the door open for future conflicts, teasing even bigger threats ahead. Overall, this remains a highly enjoyable action horror film that may not be flawless, but still stands as a memorable genre entry. While later installments may struggle to match the impact of this original, the foundation laid here is strong enough to keep me invested in the franchise. It's also worth noting that the film subtly flips traditional gender expectations by placing a hardened female warrior at its center, which feels refreshing. Unfortunately, it still follows many familiar genre conventions elsewhere, making large portions predictable. Some side plot elements feel unnecessary, as though they exist simply because the genre demands them, rather than because the story truly needs them. Visually, the heavy black leather, industrial goth style is very much a product of its era. It can feel dated today, yet that same aesthetic also defines the movie's heightened reality, making its exaggerated world easier to accept. In the end, the film offers a mix of guilty pleasure thrills, stylish action, and dramatic excess. It's not a deep masterpiece, but if you're in the mood for sleek monsters, slow-motion gunfights, and gothic spectacle, there's still plenty here to enjoy. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, and honestly, it doesn't need to. This is a stylish, entertaining action horror ride that knows exactly what it wants to be. Nothing revolutionary, but solid fun once it gets going. I'd land somewhere around a 6 out of 10. At its core, Underworld feels like a sleek action horror hybrid in the spirit of Blade, even if it never quite reaches that level. The action sequences are sharp, the environments are atmospheric, and the city itself feels strangely alien, like a gothic collision between ancient architecture and modern decay. The story revolves around a centuries-long conflict between vampires and werewolves, with the vampires seemingly holding the upper hand as their enemies dwindle. Complicating things is a human doctor who suddenly becomes a priority target for the werewolves, though the reason for their obsession isn't immediately clear. Add heavy gunfire, snarling creatures, and plenty of bloodshed, and you have the foundation of the film. There are flaws. The plot leans heavily on betrayals and shifting loyalties, sometimes to the point of confusion. Even by the end, it's not entirely satisfying how the importance of the Doctor is fully justified. Still, the constant stream of action and violence helps keep momentum alive. One amusing contrast is how the werewolves appear raw and savage, while the vampires present themselves as refined and aristocratic. For much of the runtime, it's difficult to root for either faction until their true motivations are finally laid bare. Like The Matrix, the film embraces slow motion, stylized combat, and wire-assisted movement. After the success of that movie, countless early 2000s films borrowed similar techniques, and Underworld clearly rides that wave while applying it to a horror setting. It doesn't always feel original, but it does feel confident. Revisiting the film years later on Blu-ray reminded me why it left an impression. The tension builds nicely, and the mythology, while simple, kept me engaged. Standout performances come from Bill Nighy as Victor and Michael Sheen as Lucien. Sheen, in particular, brings surprising depth and sympathy to a character who could have easily been one note. He would later appear in the very different vampire franchise Twilight, but his work here is far more compelling. Kate Beckinsale looks fantastic as Selene, channeling a cool, trenchcoat-clad presence that clearly echoes Neo from The Matrix. She performs well, though emotionally, I never fully connected with her character. She often feels more like a stylish observer than a deeply explored protagonist. The CGI werewolves don't bother me much. While obviously digital, the filmmakers compensate with practical gore and physical impact when creatures clash, which helps maintain a sense of weight and danger. Narratively, the script is extremely straightforward. Vampires live among humans, some become elite soldiers known as death dealers, and their sole mission is eradicating werewolves. Things only become truly interesting once Selene begins uncovering uncomfortable truths about the war and the lies supporting it. From that point onward, the movie becomes far more engaging. Director Len Wiseman handles the material competently. Considering the film juggles a long-running war, a forbidden-style romance, heavy mythology, and high-octane action, it could have collapsed under its own ambition. Instead, it holds together reasonably well. The film does take itself very seriously, sometimes too seriously, but that earnestness is preferable to turning the concept into parody. Visually, the movie is striking. The dark, glossy aesthetic occasionally resembles a music video, yet it complements the action nicely. And let's be honest, the film absolutely leans into Beckinsale's striking look in leather and latex. It may be an obvious tactic, but it works. In the end, Underworld isn't a masterpiece, but it's a solid, stylish action horror film with memorable imagery, strong supporting performances, and an intriguing mythos. It has rough edges and missed opportunities, yet it remains an enjoyable entry in early 2000s genre cinema. Most of the supporting cast blends together into a collection of long-haired, brooding European-looking men, with only one performer truly making a strong impression as a distinguished vampire elder. The action sequences push excess to the extreme, but they remain consistently fun, and considering we're dealing with supernatural creatures, a little exaggeration feels forgivable. The computer-generated effects are fairly solid, especially given how often they're hidden in shadow. Personally, I'll take dark and atmospheric visuals over brightly lit but poorly executed imagery any day. Taken as a whole, the film isn't particularly impressive. The romantic angle barely registers, the combat lacks the inventiveness of genre-defining action films, and the storytelling feels cluttered. Yet despite its flaws, I still found myself enjoying it. The lead performance is strong, and the movie remains entertaining from start to finish. With its leather-clad heroine and permanent blue-tinted nightscape, the film clearly wants to appear stylish and edgy. Unfortunately, trying too hard to be cool often has the opposite effect. Truly stylish films tend to be driven by a director's passion to express something, whether that's an idea, a feeling, or even just personal amusement. Here, style exists mostly for its own sake. The movie doesn't aim to explore deeper themes, and it doesn't even pretend to. Instead, it functions as a glossy showcase for moody posing, sharp looks, and tough guy dialogue. Even the late story twist, which could have added depth, feels more like a clever afterthought than the result of thoughtful planning. Nearly every major element, character development, emotional engagement, narrative momentum, lands somewhere between weak and underdeveloped. Still, the film maintains a basic level of competence. You're never fully invested, but you're also rarely so annoyed that you want to turn it off. It's acceptable background entertainment for a couple of hours. What puzzled me most was how oddly dull the experience felt. There's plenty happening on screen, a steady supply of visual effects, and an ongoing mystery surrounding the ancient conflict, yet it never quite clicks. While I generally enjoy vampire stories and prefer werewolf lore even more, this was marketed as a balanced fusion of both, but it leans heavily toward the vampire side. Considering how questionable the werewolf effects look, that imbalance may be for the best. The undeniable highlight is the central character, a fierce and capable warrior brought to life with conviction and presence. Without her, I doubt I'd have much motivation to follow this franchise further. Unfortunately, the film borrows heavily from other well-known action franchises, which makes it feel derivative. On top of that, the script frequently bends its own rules to move the plot along, focusing more on teasing secrets than building meaningful character arcs. It also feels very much like the first chapter of a larger story, almost aggressively setting up sequels. Despite its reputation, the movie isn't terrible. As someone who has watched an enormous number of horror films, I found enough here to stay engaged. The setting is stylish, the performances are serviceable, and the cinematography is often striking. There's plenty of violence, though surprisingly little in the way of graphic horror, and suspense is largely missing. Even so, the pacing keeps things from becoming boring. In the end, it feels like a blend of two major action horror trends, swapping digital realities and zombies for fanged immortals and shape-shifting beasts. It's far from original, often shallow, and occasionally frustrating, but it's also slick, fast-moving, and just entertaining enough to justify giving it a chance. Honestly, I'm not complaining. I actually had a good time with this one. What stood out most is how much care went into establishing the universe. The film takes time to explain its mythology, the ancient grudges, and the long history between these supernatural factions, which makes the world feel textured and alive. That attention to detail pays off, because you end up understanding these creatures and their endless war rather than just watching random battles. The script rarely feels dull. There's a steady stream of action, layered with intrigue, and plenty of stylish gunfights to keep things moving. On top of that, Kate Beckinsale dominates the screen as a fierce, lethal vampire warrior, cool, confident, and undeniably striking. Watching her tear through enemies in leather gear alone makes the experience entertaining. One of the biggest appeals is seeing two iconic horror monsters pitted against each other, both trying to outmaneuver the other using weapons, tactics, and brute force. The vampire clan finds itself under constant threat from a ruthless Lycan uprising, and Beckinsale's Selene stands out as a rebellious figure within her own ranks. She doesn't always follow orders, questions authority, and ultimately allows her emotions to shape her choices, especially when she becomes intrigued by a man connected to the very enemy she's supposed to destroy. Bullets fly, claws slash, and Selene leaves a trail of destruction behind her, angering both vampires and werewolves alike. It's chaotic, violent, and stylish in a way that feels refreshingly different from many traditional vampire films. If you're into this kind of dark action horror blend, it's an easy recommendation and far more exciting than many older, slower-paced vampire stories. At its core, the movie revolves around a beautiful vampire warrior caught in the middle of an ancient war between two species, and her growing connection to someone who dreams of ending that conflict. Even though I wouldn't call myself a hardcore fan of vampire cinema, this film worked for me because it balances combat, survival, romance, and tragedy surprisingly well. That mix of relentless warfare and emotional stakes is something you don't see handled this effectively very often. Beckinsale's performance as Selene is a major highlight. She brings intensity, vulnerability, and strength to the role, while Scott Speedman's portrayal of Michael Corvin gives the story a human anchor. Their dynamic adds a softer layer beneath the gunfire and bloodshed. There was a time, especially in the early 2000s, when mentioning vampires versus werewolves instantly brought this franchise to mind. Then came an era of sparkling vampires and shirtless werewolves aimed at teen drama audiences, pushing darker franchises like this into the background. But if you're tired of supernatural creatures staring into each other's eyes and whispering about feelings, this film offers something more aggressive and grounded. Think of it as a grimmer, moodier cousin to Resident Evil, drenched in shadows, packed with gunfights, and fueled by gothic style. The story follows a vampire assassin, known as a death dealer, who begins to question everything after encountering a human who may be the key to changing the fate of both species. Visually, it borrows the bleak atmosphere of films like The Crow, mixes in action choreography reminiscent of The Matrix, and adds its own sleek aesthetic. If that combination appeals to you, along with Beckinsale sprinting through dark corridors in skin-tight combat gear, then you'll probably find a lot to enjoy here. The success of this entry even led to several sequels, some stronger than others, but the original remains the most distinctive. While it may not reach the legendary status some hoped for, it still delivers a solid experience for fans of monster action cinema. That said, the film isn't flawless. Certain scenes drag on longer than necessary, and there's a noticeable emphasis on keeping the vampires and werewolves in human form, talking and plotting rather than fully unleashing their monstrous sides. At times, you may find yourself wishing for fewer conversations and more feral chaos. The premise centers on Selene, a vampire hunter living among a Gothic society hidden within an eerie European stronghold.